don't actually play that much D&D these days, which is very unfortunate. One reason, of course, is the pandemic, which is making it very difficult and unsafe to schedule an in-person session, but the other reason is that D&D sessions can consume your entire life. They're a scheduling nightmare that some party members may have to miss from time to time because of real-life responsibilities, and you have to make them long enough to actually progress your campaign, or it just doesn't feel worth it to have a session in the first place. It's very common that campaigns don't reach a conclusion because the nightmare that is the logistics of a D&D session just causes everything to come crashing down. This is why I thought I had something really special when I first came up with the idea of online sessionless games. Now, play-by-post isn't the most original idea, but I didn't know that at the time. It just suddenly hit me one day that if myself and my friends are all too busy for actual D&D sessions, then we can just commit 5 minutes a day to online forum-based D&D. No more waiting for a session. This could be done daily without pushing my other hobbies and responsibilities out of the way. So I opened a new Discord server, invited some friends, and then because I'm a hyper-organized perfectionist, I had to lay some extra infrastructure so this could be more than just a single game of D&D. There was a channel where aspiring DMs could look for players for their own games. The game channels themselves were publicly readable so that everybody could follow along with the games as they were happening, and the out-of-character channels remained private for extra planning. It was great. There were great foundations from which a genuine community could grow on this server. My own intention for the server was to run a bunch of one-shots to help me develop my world. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, I had finally cracked the code on how to run a successful in-person one-shot that actually fit within the time constraints of a session. I started considering every encounter, be it combat, puzzle, social, exploration, or whatever, as though it would take 90 minutes. And it actually worked! So now I had all these tools at my disposal to create functional one-shots, and I was really excited to give it a shot. Secondly, it's because you can get really creative with one-shots. Like, if you're only going to see these characters once, you can make some very interesting, wacky characters that are very out of the blue, very disconnected from what you would normally run. And thirdly, I was in this weird phase of my world building where I would drip feed my players content through gameplay, never through conversation. So effectively, since I viewed every minute detail of my world as a potential spoiler, I never got to share anything. Regardless, the first game I ran on this server was my second time running through my one-shot called The Price of Progress. The premise was very simple. What would happen if the players, playing as themselves, awoke in a fantasy world? Specifically, the players appeared in this utterly destroyed laboratory underneath the city of Lavcraw, a major city-state in my setting that's developed the most advanced technology in the world and is home to a widely renowned university, but that tends to look the other way to what happens in its underbelly. That's a very oversimplified description of the city, but it's one of my favorite places in my setting. This play-by-post run of The Price of Progress actually went pretty well. The module opens with a social encounter as the players learn what happened to them, how they even got here in the first place, and what their objective is going to be. And then there was some successful combat following brief travel through the tunnels. Sure, there were periods of a few days when people weren't really actively participating, but there were also days when all of a sudden everyone was active, and the game progressed a lot, and that's just the nature of play-by-post. But then we got to the puzzle. If you've heard my cathedral story, you may be ready to cringe already at the word puzzle, but I promise you I've gotten a lot better at puzzles since then. After defeating some mercenaries who tried to kidnap them, the party followed the instructions of the mercenaries to another sort of laboratory, and at the back of this lab there were two connected, ornately decorated doors. One door was white with blue technological style markings, one of them was black with red arcane markings, and the core of the puzzle was that the party had to open these doors by supplying tech-based power to the white door and magic-based power to the black door, otherwise the doors wouldn't open and they wouldn't be able to progress. Now, I'd invented a few pre-existing solutions for both doors that I'd scattered throughout the room. There were about 3 or 4 pre-built solutions for each. For example, at one workstation there was a generator that the party could try to repair if they identified what it was to provide tech-based power. But I had also decided ahead of time that any solution that the party comes up with that makes sense to me, that I didn't think of ahead of time, should also open the doors. The problem is what happened when the players got stuck. Activity just sort of stopped. Weeks passed and no posts were made, so no progress was made. After a while, I realized that some players just didn't have a full understanding of what was going on in the puzzle, and part of that is because some details were posted weeks ago and were forgotten. Another part of that, though, was that there were minor elements that I didn't communicate properly, but it just got so jumbled because of the online format. My in-person group who ran this game were able to come up with a viable solution pretty quickly, and when they didn't understand something, they could just ask me, the DM, because in person, it's so easy for the Dungeon Master to say, "Oh no, I'm sorry, you misunderstood, I didn't describe that properly." But in an online format, misconceptions can take more than 24 hours to clear up, depending on if the DM is online or not, and if there's more than one misconception, this can just become an absolute mess. Added to that, the players were pretty good at not making progress or not posting too much if certain people weren't posting, because everyone wanted everyone else to participate, so they weren't jumping ahead of everyone. But that also meant that when some players got busy with school and couldn't spend the time coming up with a solution to the puzzle, or just didn't have an idea and didn't post, then some of the more active players also wouldn't post as a result, and it just kind of snowballed into an absolute slog. It's not any one person's fault, and since I started needing to devote more time to school, I also became guilty of not responding as quickly as I should. We did ultimately end up finishing that one shot, and all of the players said they did have a good time with it, but the cracks were starting to show in the play-by-post model. The rose-tinted goggles at my brilliant idea were starting to come off, and it was becoming clear that there are certainly downsides to playing D&D this way. That was the only successful one-shot that server ever ran. Now, there were other attempts. Another DM put out a call for a goblin-based one-shot that never really got off the ground, even though about 9 people, enough for 2 groups, said they would be interested. A full campaign did get started, and then just died within what would be the first 30 minutes of an in-person session, because activity dropped off a cliff. I think at one point there were literally 2 months between single posts in that game. And then I tried to run a second one-shot called the Dragonstone of Aristone, which actually did get started, although that was very difficult, and I had to constantly hound the players who signed up for their character sheets. And then, of course, because that's how it started, it just ended up slowly fizzling out. Keep in mind that all of this took place over almost a year of the server's existence. That's not much happening in a very long period of time. Now, it was still a very small community, but there were people who were invested in reading the games as they played out. In fact, Price of Progress got kicked in the pants a few times by a message in the general chat saying, "Holy shit, please do something, I want to see how this plays out." But this server was almost more like herding cats than scheduling an actual session was, and I was no shining example of good participation either. When I started Dragonstone, I had already learned that you really need good, committed players to make play-by-post work. So I asked during the signups, are you able to play 5 minutes a day? Are you able to post daily? But eventually I got tired of reminding people to post, and it just became clear that everyone was disinterested. Sadly, I made the decision to close the server after it became clear that the server was simply dead. I learned something valuable from the experience. Play-by-post is not the golden solution to playing D&D with a busy schedule that I thought it was. It comes with its own list of downsides and considerations that need to be made to make it a positive experience. When it worked, it was great. That run-through of the Price of Progress is still something that my friends talk about from time to time. But I learned that you can't run the game with just any group. Play-by-post is still a time commitment, even if I marketed it as anything but. I had a good idea, it just wasn't the right time or group for it. Oh well, I've still got good memories of pulling out my phone and my dice wherever I was for a few minutes of gameplay. I can still write one-shots and find new ways to run them. Maybe I can come up with some way to run one-shots for my streaming community on Discord or on Twitch. And that idea of a living world that was starting to be discussed before the server activity declined. Maybe that idea doesn't have to die just yet.